When the system works against you, how do you fight back? What happens when the truth becomes too loud to ignore? How many times must one person be overlooked before they finally speak up? Tamika has worked tirelessly, giving her all to a company that never saw her, never recognized her. Today, it's not just about the job she's doing, but the truth that's finally breaking through. The truth that, despite all her efforts, her worth is defined by something far beyond her skills. This is her story. But how many others are silently suffering the same fate? Tamika sat at her desk, the hum of the office around her fading into the background as she reflected on the years she had spent here. She had always been proud of her accomplishments, but lately something felt off. Her work was praised in private, but it was never acknowledged in the way it should have been. The promotions she deserved went to others, and the opportunities she fought for were always just out of reach. In a quiet moment, she confided in her colleague, Maya, a trusted friend in the office. Tamika, voice shaky but determined. Why does it always feel like I'm invisible here? I work just as hard, if not harder, than everyone else. But they always choose someone else for the big projects. It's like they don't see me, because of the color of my skin. Maya looked at her, hesitating. She had seen the frustration in Tamika's eyes, but words of comfort seemed hollow now. Maya softly. I know it's tough, but Tamika, maybe it's time to talk to someone higher up. You shouldn't have to keep carrying this burden alone. The weight of Maya's words settled heavily in the pit of Tamika's stomach. Was it really time to speak up, to challenge the very system she had been working within for so long? The days that followed felt like a slow, suffocating grind for Tamika. Each morning, she walked into the office, trying to maintain the same energy and enthusiasm she had when she first started. But now, something was different. The enthusiasm had been replaced by a quiet, simmering frustration. She was being overlooked in meetings where her ideas were just as valuable, if not more, than those of her colleagues. But it was always someone else's idea that made it to the top. One day, during a meeting, Tamika once again presented a detailed proposal she had spent days working on. She watched as her manager, Mr. Thompson, gave it a brief glance before shifting the conversation to Alex, a younger, white colleague, who quickly jumped in with a suggestion that echoed her idea. Mr. Thompson immediately praised Alex, completely ignoring Tamika's original proposal. Tamika, under her breath, barely audible. Not again. The feeling in her chest tightened. The frustration was now turning into something else, something darker. Her mind raced with questions. Why does this always happen? Does anyone even see me? Later that afternoon, in the quiet of her office, she called Maya again. This time, her voice carried the weight of all the unspoken words she had been holding in. Tamika, with a sigh, voice trembling. I don't know how much longer I can do this, Maya. Every time I put myself out there, it feels like I'm invisible. It's like I don't matter. Alex didn't even have to work hard for it. He just took my idea and ran with it. Maya's response was quiet, but Tamika could hear the sympathy in her tone. Maya gently. I'm so sorry, Tamika. But, have you thought about talking to someone about this? Maybe HR? Tamika's heart sank at the thought. She had always been the type to handle things on her own. Asking for help, especially when it came to something so personal and painful, felt like admitting defeat. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized that staying silent was taking a toll on her. Every day felt like a reminder that no matter how hard she worked, her race was always a barrier, never a bridge. The next day, after yet another presentation where her ideas were sidelined in favor of someone else's, Tamika decided she could no longer stay silent. She knew something had to change. Her patience had worn thin, and the slow erosion of her confidence had reached a breaking point. She sat at her desk, fingers trembling as she typed a draft of an email to HR, the words coming slower than she expected. She stared at the screen for what felt like hours, questioning whether it was worth it, wondering if she would just make things worse. Her mind flashed back to the countless mornings she had walked into the office full of hope, to the early days when she believed hard work alone would get her what she deserved. Now she was starting to wonder if hard work was ever enough. Tamika, to herself, with determination. I can't keep doing this. It's time to take a stand. Her finger hovered over the keyboard, then with a deep breath, she hit send. The message was out there. The battle had begun. Tamika felt a strange mix of fear and relief. She didn't know what the outcome would be, but for the first time in months, she felt like she had taken control. But even as she clicked away from the email, doubts crept in. What if no one listened? What if the system was too broken to change? But no matter the outcome, Tamika knew one thing. This time, She wasn't going to let herself be invisible anymore. The days after Tamika hit send on that email were the longest of her life. The tension in her chest seemed to tighten with every passing moment, each one heavier than the last. The silence in the office felt oppressive, as if the walls were closing in. Tamika kept her head down, burying herself in work, but her mind constantly circled back to the same question. What now? One morning, she was called into a meeting with her manager, Mr. Thompson, and the HR representative, Karen, whose face was unreadable. Tamika's heart raced as she sat down, her palms slick with sweat. She had no idea what to expect, but she was ready to face whatever came her way. Mr. Thompson, with a forced calmness. Tamika, we've reviewed your email, and I wanted to discuss your concerns. I know this has been a difficult time for you, and we appreciate your honesty. The words sounded rehearsed, but Tamika wasn't fooled. She could hear the undertones of defensiveness, as if Mr. Thompson was trying to shield himself and the company from the truth. Tamika sat up straighter, her nerves starting to settle as the rush of adrenaline began to take over. She wasn't going to let this moment slip away. Tamika, slowly, firmly. I don't want sympathy, Mr. Thompson. I want change. I've been here for over 5 years, and I've given this company everything I've got. But I'm still passed over for promotions. My ideas are dismissed in meetings. And when I speak up, I'm either ignored or made to feel like I'm causing trouble. I can't pretend this is normal anymore. This isn't just about me. It's about the system that's set up to keep people like me from advancing. There was a brief silence, and Tamika felt her words hang in the air. Mr. Thompson shifted uncomfortably in his chair, but Karen spoke up before he could respond. Karen, calm but stern. Tamika, I understand that you feel overlooked. But we need to address this carefully. We can't make sweeping judgments based on one person's perspective. These things are often more complex than they appear. Tamika's heart pounded in her chest, but she couldn't let them minimize what she was saying. Her voice grew stronger as she pressed on. Tamika, cutting in. I've spent years trying to make things work. I've held my head down, worked harder than anyone else, but it's never enough. I watch colleagues, Alex, for example, get promoted because they're given more opportunities, while I'm stuck in the same position. How much more should I do? How much longer do I have to prove myself before I'm treated the same as everyone else? Mr. Thompson opened his mouth to speak, but Tamika didn't give him the chance. She was done holding back. Tamika, with quiet intensity. It's about more than just promotions or recognition. It's about respect. It's about seeing me for who I am and what I bring to this company. Not just the color of my skin. And honestly, I'm tired of pretending that things will get better on their own. There was a moment of stillness. Mr. Thompson looked at Karen, as though silently asking for reassurance. Karen's face remained neutral, but Tamika could tell that her words had hit their mark. She had expected the usual corporate defense, the empty promises, but instead something shifted. For the first time, she felt like her concerns were being acknowledged, not dismissed. It wasn't much, but it was something. Mr. Thompson, after a long pause, softly. Tamika, I hear you. And I'll be honest, I haven't given this issue the attention it deserves. But I want to work with you to address it. Tamika's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't sure what this meant yet, but for the first time, she saw a glimmer of hope. She wasn't just a cog in the machine anymore. She had made them listen. Tamika, with a mix of hope and skepticism. I appreciate that, Mr. Thompson. But this isn't just about words. I need to see real change. I need to know that my work, my contributions matter. Mr. Thompson nodded, his expression more genuine than it had been at the beginning of the meeting. Mr. Thompson, we will start the process of reviewing our diversity and inclusion policies. But this conversation needs to continue. We need to do better. You have my word that we'll make this a priority. Tamika left the meeting with a sense of cautious optimism. It wasn't a victory yet, but it was a start. The weight in her chest had lightened, but now she had to stay vigilant. She wasn't sure where this would lead, but she knew one thing. She had stood up for herself, and that had made all the difference. As she walked back to her desk, the office felt different, not quite right, but at least there was a chance for change. And that was enough for now. The days after the meeting with Mr. Thompson were a blur of tension for Tamika. She kept her head down, still working diligently, but the air around her had shifted. She could feel the weight of the consequences of speaking up hanging heavily over her. The office had become a quieter place for her. Her colleagues who had once smiled and waved now avoided her gaze. It was subtle at first, a look of hesitation, a conversation quickly ending when she entered the room. But with each passing day it became clearer. Tamika was no longer part of the team. Her work was scrutinized more than ever. She'd always been meticulous, but now every report she submitted seemed to come under intense scrutiny. The comments on her presentations were more critical, and her emails were met with an urgency that felt foreign. It was as if the moment she had spoken up, everything changed, and not in a way that made her feel empowered, but in a way that made her feel small. Tamika knew this was the fallout. She had expected some resistance, but she hadn't anticipated how isolating it would feel. The more she tried to prove herself, the more the system seemed to push back. It wasn't just about the discrimination anymore. It was about being made to feel like a troublemaker for simply demanding the respect she deserved. One morning, after a particularly tense meeting where her ideas were dismissed without a second thought, she walked back to her desk, her shoulders heavy. She sat down, feeling the sting of the cold shoulders around her. She pulled up her latest project on her screen, but her eyes blurred with unshed tears. She blinked them away, quickly adjusting her glasses. Tamika, softly to herself. This is what it feels like, to stand up and have them push you back into place. Just as she was about to start typing again, Maya walked over to her desk. Maya had been quiet since the meeting, but now she paused at Tamika's cubicle, looking down at her with a mixture of sympathy and guilt. Maya, hesitant. Tamika, are you okay? You've been distant lately. Tamika looked up, meeting Maya's eyes. She wanted to speak, to explain how it felt to be invisible again, to be punished for wanting equality. But the words caught in her throat. She could see the doubt in Maya's eyes, as if she wasn't sure whether to support her or not. Tamika, finally, with a forced smile. I'm fine. Just adjusting, I guess. I knew it wasn't going to be easy, but I didn't think it would be like this. Maya nodded, but her eyes told a different story. She had seen how Tamika was treated, and she knew it wasn't right. But there was nothing she could do to change it. Maya's discomfort was palpable, and it stung Tamika more than she cared to admit. A few hours later, Tamika was called into another meeting, this time with Mr. Thompson and Karen from HR. Her stomach dropped. She hadn't been expecting this, but she knew what it meant. They had never contacted her about her concerns, but now, it felt like they were about to address the issue head-on. The tension in the room was suffocating as she took a seat across from Mr. Thompson, who avoided her gaze. Mr. Thompson, with forced politeness. Tamika, we've received feedback about the email you sent. We need to discuss the way you've been handling these concerns. We understand that this is a sensitive issue, but we believe you've been a bit aggressive in your approach. The words hit Tamika like a slap in the face. She had expected criticism, but hearing it so coldly from Mr. Thompson felt like a betrayal. Her mind raced, the anger rising in her chest, but she swallowed it down, trying to stay composed. Tamika calm, but with a tight jaw. Aggressive? I've been fighting for the respect I've earned. If that's what you want to call it, then fine. But don't pretend this isn't about race. This is about the system that refuses to see me, no matter how much I prove myself. There was silence in the room as Mr. Thompson looked at Karen, unsure how to proceed. Karen, usually stoic, seemed uncomfortable, shifting in her seat. Tamika could see they had expected her to apologize, to back down. But she wasn't going to. Tamika, with quiet strength. I've worked here for years, Mr. Thompson. I've given everything, and yet, I'm treated like an outsider. You can't pretend this is about anything but race. Tamika stood up slowly, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know what was going to happen next, but one thing was certain. She wasn't going to be silenced again. As she left the meeting, she felt the weight of the world on her shoulders, but she also felt a spark of something else, defiance. This fight wasn't over. Not by a long shot. After her confrontation with Mr. Thompson and Karen, Tamika thought that things would change. She had spoken up, and surely that would lead to a shift. But as the days wore on, the weight of her decision began to settle heavily on her shoulders. Her colleagues, once friendly and open, had become distant. The cold shoulder wasn't just a passive response, it was an active pushback. At first, Tamika tried to carry on as usual. She continued to work hard, meeting deadlines and presenting ideas, but the subtle shifts in the office dynamics were impossible to ignore. In meetings, her contributions were routinely ignored, overshadowed by the louder, more assertive voices of her colleagues. Even when she spoke up, it felt like the room grew quieter, as though she didn't belong there anymore. Tamika, to herself, softly as she sat at her desk. I don't know how much longer I can keep doing this. Every time I try to speak, it's like no one listens. Why am I even here if nothing changes? Despite these thoughts, Tamika refused to back down. She didn't want to give in to the system, but the loneliness of her struggle began to gnaw at her. The confidence she had once felt in her abilities was beginning to fade. Each passing day felt like a reminder that no matter how hard she worked, the system wasn't built for people like her to succeed. One afternoon, she found herself walking through the office, carrying a presentation she had worked on for weeks. Her heart was heavy with the knowledge that it would probably be dismissed without a second thought. She passed by a group of colleagues, laughing together, their conversations halting as she walked by. Not one of them acknowledged her. It stung, but she kept walking, clutching the papers in her hand like a lifeline. Maya, catching up with her, voice soft but sincere. "Tamika, how are you holding up? I know it's been tough, but I want you to know I'm here for you." Tamika smiled faintly, but the exhaustion was clear in her eyes. Tamika, trying to stay composed. "I'm okay, Maya. Just trying to get through the day. It's like nothing I do matters. They've made it clear they don't want to hear from me anymore." Maya reached out, placing a hand on Tamika's arm. "Maya, gently. I know you're doing your best, but you don't have to do it alone. Maybe it's time to think about what you want for yourself. Do you want to stay in a place that's never going to value you the way you deserve?" Tamika paused, looking down at the floor. She had heard Maya's words before, but they carried more weight now. She had spent so long fighting for validation from a system that was never going to change. But what if it wasn't about fighting anymore? What if it was about walking away, protecting her peace, and finding somewhere where she could truly thrive? Tamika, with a sigh, a mixture of resignation and strength. "I don't know, Maya. I thought this would be enough. But I can't keep fighting this way. Not anymore." The conversation hung in the air between them, the truth of it settling in. Tamika didn't know what the future held, but she felt a shift within herself, a quiet determination to stop pouring herself into a system that refused to recognize her worth. She had been holding on to a dream, but now she wondered if it was time to let go. As she returned to her desk, Tamika felt a sense of clarity. She wasn't sure where her next step would lead, but she knew she couldn't stay here forever. And perhaps that was the first step toward truly reclaiming her voice. The long days of isolation and frustration had begun to take their toll on Tamika. As she sat in her apartment one evening, staring out the window, the weight of everything that had happened seemed to wash over her all at once. She had spent so much of her energy fighting for respect, for acknowledgement, but now she found herself questioning whether it was worth it. Was it worth the emotional exhaustion? Was it worth the toll on her self-esteem? She had always prided herself on her work ethic, her dedication, but now, it seemed like the harder she tried, the more the walls of this system pushed her down. Her mind wandered back to the countless mornings she had walked into the office with hope, her optimism bubbling over at the idea of new opportunities. She thought about her first days at the company, the excitement she had felt, the belief that hard work would eventually pay off. But the more she tried to climb, the more she realized the ladder had been built to keep her from ever reaching the top. And it wasn't just about her skills, it was about the color of her skin. Tamika reached for her phone, scrolling through messages she had exchanged with Maya. A message from just a week ago stood out. "Maya, you don't have to fight this battle alone. We'll figure it out together." Tamika closed her eyes, feeling the weight of those words. Maya had always been there for her, always ready to lend an ear, but in the quiet of her apartment, Tamika knew the truth. This battle wasn't something she could fight for others. It had to start with her. She had been waiting for the company to change, for her colleagues to see her, but the truth was that she couldn't rely on a system that was so deeply ingrained in its own biases. She set the phone down, and in that moment, something shifted within her. She realized that, up until now, she had been fighting to prove her worth to others, to a system that wasn't interested in seeing her as equal. But what if the fight wasn't about proving anything to them? What if the real fight was about reclaiming her own sense of value, independent of how they saw her? Her breath caught as the realization hit her. She had been living for their approval, waiting for a validation that might never come. What she needed, she realized, was to validate herself first. She didn't need their recognition to define her worth. She had always known her value. It was time to start believing in it again. With newfound clarity, Tamika stood up, walking to the window and gazing out at the city. The lights below sparkled, but it was the light within her that began to shine brighter. She wasn't a product of the system. She was a product of her own strength, her own abilities, and her own resilience. Tamika, softly to herself, "I don't need to fit into their mold. I've always been enough, and I will find a way to prove that, not to them, but to myself. It was a quiet, powerful moment of realization. Tamika understood now that her journey wasn't about changing the minds of others. It was about stepping into her own power, taking control of her future, and letting go of the need for external validation. She didn't need the company to change. She needed to change the way she saw herself. As she sat back down at her desk, ready to face the next step, she felt a sense of peace settle over her. The struggle hadn't ended, but she now understood that she was the one who had to set the course. And with that, she was ready to face whatever came next. A few weeks after Tamika's realization, she found herself in a new company, a place where her ideas were not just welcomed but celebrated. The environment was different. It felt like she could breathe again. But the struggle wasn't over. The fight for equality and respect was ongoing, and Tamika was determined to use her voice not just for herself, but for others who had faced the same challenges. Tamika, speaking at a community event with quiet strength. I spent years trying to prove my worth to a system that wasn't built for me. And while I found a place that values my voice, I know too many others who are still silenced. This is our fight, not just for our own futures, but for the futures of everyone who feels invisible. The room was filled with nods and whispers of agreement. Tamika felt a wave of relief, the kind of relief that only comes when you finally realize that your fight has meaning. Tamika, pausing with conviction. If you've ever felt dismissed, overlooked, or unheard, know that you don't have to stand alone. Speak up. Take action. Because when we stand together, we can change the world, one voice at a time. As the crowd applauded, Tamika knew that the journey had only just begun. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for everyone who had ever felt marginalized. And this was just the start of a bigger movement. The story of Tamika's journey through discrimination in the workplace teaches a profound lesson about the importance of self-empowerment and the courage to stand up for what is right, even when the road ahead seems uncertain. Tamika's struggle wasn't just about fighting for her own recognition, but about recognizing her own worth, independent of the system that had constantly undermined her. For years, Tamika worked tirelessly, putting in long hours and offering valuable contributions. Yet, she found herself repeatedly overlooked, her ideas dismissed, and her hard work undervalued, simply because of her race. But rather than allowing these injustices to define her, she took a bold step. She confronted the issue head-on, demanding the respect she deserved. In doing so, she learned a powerful lesson, that true strength lies not in seeking validation from others, but in validating yourself first. The moment Tamika decided to stop seeking approval from a system that wasn't built for her was the turning point. She realized that her worth wasn't dependent on the recognition she received from others, but on the belief she had in herself. This transformation wasn't easy, and it came with its share of struggles, but it showed her that by standing firm and embracing her own value, she could create change, not just for herself, but for those around her. Tamika's story is a reminder that no matter how hard life becomes, we must never lose sight of our self-worth. In the face of adversity, it's not the system that defines us. It's the strength and resilience we find within ourselves that will ultimately determine our success. Tamika's journey is a powerful reminder of how important it is to stand up for yourself when faced with injustice, especially in a system that's not built for you. How can we, as individuals, break free from systems that diminish our worth and amplify our voices? What steps can we take to create a more inclusive environment where everyone is treated equally? Share your thoughts, experiences, and let's keep the conversation going. How can we support each other in the fight for equality and justice?